2022 was a record-setting year for exploits in the crypto space. According to TRM Labs, more than $3.6 billion in funds have been drained this year, with a vast amount being stolen from decentralized finance attacks. Joining us now to discuss is Erin Plante. She's Vice President of Investigations at crypto sleuthing firm Chainalysis, and Ari Redbord. He is from the aforementioned TRM Labs. Good morning, Ari and Erin.
Hey, good morning. Thanks so much for having us.
Glad to have you both here. So let's start with you, Ari. Why have we seen such a high amount of exploits in this past year, and why DeFi?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It really has been one of the biggest stories of the year, to be sure. I mean, hacks have really become sort of an everyday part of life in the crypto ecosystem. You know, and as you mentioned, DeFi has really been a significant target. You know, of that 3.7 billion that you mentioned earlier, the overwhelming amount has been in the DeFi space, about 80% or about 3 billion of that. And I think there's a couple reasons. One, there's a lot of liquidity sitting sort of in DeFi today. A lot of people are engaging in the space. There's a lot of sort of, you know, DeFi assets. That the other piece to all of this is the really need to harden cyber defenses. A lot of sort of, you know, DeFi protocols and DeFi entities in the space are new and building and have not prioritized necessarily cyber defenses, which is a huge piece of all of this. So I think there's a lot to it here, but there's absolutely DeFi has been a target, you know, certainly this year in terms of these attacks.
And you know, Erin, with all of that, we're also seeing a lot of attacks coming primarily on these, or I wouldn't say primarily, but definitely we're seeing a lot of these attacks happen on the so-called bridges between different blockchains. That seems to be a common, I don't want to say it was the largest of the amount of hacks, but it certainly took a lot of the headlines. Why was that, and what did you guys see when it came to that? Were there any underlying themes?
Bridges, in the way that they function, have a large amount of liquidity built into them because they are transferring crypto from one platform to another. At any given time, the wallets that drive those bridges will have significant amounts of funds across a lot of different assets. So that is what we've seen with the hacks this year that have impacted bridges, is that there is a lot of funds that are stolen, but they're also split across a lot of different assets. And that's also where we're seeing the sophistication and the money laundering, because all of these assets need to be laundered, and they go through chain hopping and they go through mixers in an attempt to be cashed out. So there has been an increased focus by law enforcement and regulators to crack down on the money laundering, because inevitably the criminals want to cash out these funds. So it's if you could stop the point of cash out, you can try to limit the attacks.
I think Erin raises I was just going to say real quickly, I think Erin raises a really important point here, and that is sort of like 2022 has been the year of hacks, but we've also seen sort of a really impactful regulatory response. You know, particularly, OFAC, the U.S. Treasury Department, has used tools like TRM and Chainalysis to sort of track and trace the flow of hacked funds. And what that has led them to do is actually sanction cryptocurrency addresses associated with North Korea, for example, which perpetrated the largest hack of the year, the hack on the Ronin bridge. And then use tools to continue to track and trace, you know, to mixing services like Blender.io that also was sanctioned, and then Tornado Cash, ultimately a mixing service on Ethereum, which again in and of itself became one of the biggest stories of the year. Sort of this conversation around security versus privacy, but really it is sort of the hacks and then the regulatory response that we've seen, I think, really come to a head in 2022.
Yeah, and you know, this is all coming with the backdrop, of course, when I'm thinking about these mixers, the recent headlines when it came to Quadriga, all of a sudden a wallet wakes up and some of the funds go into a mixer, about 100 Bitcoin or so, go to a mixer, and it also reminds us that there are a lot of these bankruptcies now of the centralized exchanges, a lot of questions about what's happening. Is that, Erin, is that affecting anything? Are you seeing any changes in the way things are going on in terms of hacking, et cetera, in the crypto space since the collapse of some of these major exchanges? I'm thinking of, Voyager and also not just the exchanges, but also some of the, and obviously FTX, but also the 3ACs of the world, 3 Hours Capitals of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So the crackdown on the mixing services has led to building of new and more sophisticated mixing services is what you would expect. So if you look at Quadriga, for example, as you mentioned, the funds very clearly go to Wasabi. That's been published pretty widely. But what we see after Wasabi is that the funds go to yet another mixer. And that's really common. And that's also what we're seeing in some of the biggest hacking cases that we're working on, is that the funds will go to a mixer that's fairly widely known. And most of the investigators on Twitter and Chainalysis and TRM Labs and other blockchain intelligence firms will show those mixers, and they will then go to a more obscure mixer after that. And more of these are popping up, and it creates a need within the regulations and law enforcement to, after a sanction event and after an event, to take down an obfuscation tool like a mixer, to continue to follow up on what pops up after those events occur. What mixers are then filling that gap, because the criminals aren't going away. They're not, they're not stealing funds any less than they were when those mixers were in existence. They're looking for other tools. So there really is a need to continue to evolve the intelligence and the tools to be able to identify the new mixers that are popping up in those places. And they're quite obscure. And criminals now know that mixers are seen by law enforcement, they're seen by investigators, they're identified by the investigators. So they're often going to multiple. They're going to Wasabi, and then they're going to another one. And then they might go to another one after that. And the goal of that movement for them is to ultimately hit a mixer that law enforcement and investigators don't know exists or doesn't have the data attributed to that mixer. So then they can cash out and go to a centralized exchange, and the exchange is not aware that those are stolen funds.
So Ari, what do you think is going to be the solution to deal with these kind of problems? And what do you think will be the solution coming forward in 2023? How do you think things will be approached any differently?
Yeah, look, I think the first piece is sort of working to harden cyber defenses to ensure that these hacks don't happen in the first place. A lot of them are sort of social engineering and other tactics used by North Korea and other sort of cyber criminal elements. I thought the other part is sort of to Erin's point, which was really well taken, and that is, look, when I was a prosecutor for about 11 years, and we used to talk about whack-a-mole, you'd knock out one shell company and another would pop up. And I think and I think we're seeing that here, as these mixing services or other sort of laundering tools ultimately become more sophisticated, so do the blockchain intelligence tools like TRM, like Chainalysis, so do the investigators who are using these tools. And I think we've already seen that, investigations don't end at mixers anymore, as we've seen. There are tools that our tools are able to identify and trace through in many sort of situations. So I think the reality is sort of the bad guys are getting better. And their tactics are more sophisticated, just like with darknet markets. You take down Hydra and 6 other ones pop up. But the reality is the tools and the regulation and the investigators, law enforcement, are also becoming more sophisticated. And we'll certainly see that play out in 2023.
And you see the same as well, Erin? Do you have any additional thoughts for the coming year?
Yeah, absolutely. Education in the whole space is improving immensely. We're seeing law enforcement agencies and intel agencies all around the world increasing their ability to investigate crypto-related crime Also adding new tools to their toolboxes. As a forensic kit, you want every tool in your disposal to be able to trace through whatever you might run into. And the blockchain intelligence companies, as Ari mentioned, are increasing the tools that are available to these law enforcement agencies, along with the education that they're receiving to be able to tackle anything that they might run into. So all of that is really important to stay ahead of the criminals and stop this type of hacking activity.